Today we have the Neumann NDH20, which is a closed-back dynamic driver headphone from Neumann, and it comes in at $500 US, so it is by no means a cheap headphone, but it does sit below the $1,000 price point where a lot of really great headphones sit. So let's phone compares to some of those headphones. So let's see how this headphone compares. Starting off with the build, this, if anyone can recognize, is a very similar build to the Sennheiser HD630s, and I'm not exactly sure what the differences are because I've not had both side by side, but these are very well built. Starting off with the headband, you've got this bumper car rubber headband on the sides, and you've got a piece of spring steel through the center which looks like brushed metal. It is very pretty, as you can see. And looking at the headband itself, you have two thin leather pieces here, and these are probably the worst parts of the build because it is very thin, and honestly I think it is less comfortable than having no padding at all, because these two lumps dig into my head and cause a hot spot within 10 minutes. And then you have a very solid feeling adjusting mechanism with a cable passing through the center, because this is a single-sided cable, and you also have some really solid metal hinges. The whole piece looks like a solid piece of metal, and the hinge itself feels really robust, and I have no trouble trusting that this is a hinge that will last for many years. And furthermore, you have some swivel here, and this swivel here has a bit of resistance to it, which makes it very solid feeling as well. Furthermore, you've got more metal here, and the cups themselves are very beautiful. As you can see, it's another piece of brushed aluminium for the cup itself, with a black band around the edge, and you have Neumann logo here as well, which also looks great. So overall, from a looks perspective and a build perspective, this is probably one of the most handsome headphones I've had in my hands, so that's a great thing. Moving on to the cups themselves. These ear pads are memory foam, but they also happen to be very stiff, which is a strange combination. It reminds me a little bit of the AKG K7XX ear pads, which is also a stiff memory foam, and it's one of those things where it initially will be uncomfortable, and over time, as the heat from your face softens the memory foam inside these ear pads, it will conform to the shape of your face better, but it is still not very comfortable, to be honest. And that's one of the downsides of this headphone, because sure, you can swap ear pads, however that will change the sound drastically, and if you don't want to alter the sound much, but you want something more comfortable, you're going to have a lot of trouble finding something that will work with these headphones. Aside from that, you get quite a few accessories with this headphone. So starting off, you get a very long straight cable that terminates in a 2.5mm jack. You get a carrying pouch, and you also get a coiled cable, which is quite nice. Very nicely built materials for practicality for monitoring purposes, so that's a good thing to see. Aside from that, you see a proprietary locking mechanism here for the headphone side of the jack, and that might make finding aftermarket cables a little bit difficult. However, I think that with the popularity and the hype surrounding these headphones, there are sure to be people that are going to be making some replacement cables for these, so that's not something I will worry about. So starting off with the sound, these headphones I would characterize as overall warm, neutral sounding, which is not something I give lightly to a closed-back headphone, because most closed-back headphones tend to have very bizarre frequency responses. For example, another popular headphone under $1,000 mark that is also closed back are these, which is the Focal Allegias. And I've reviewed these, and while I think that this does outperform the Neumanns in a lot of aspects, one aspect the Neumanns do get better is a more neutral tuning. And the Focal Allegias, you can see the frequency response. There's going to be some bizarre dips in the bass region, as well as a bit of push forward mid-range. However, if you look at the Neumanns, they actually fit the Harman target very well. I'd say the mid-range is about on point. Might be lacking a little bit of presence around the 3K region, but apart from that and a bit of overexcited bass, this is quite close to what I consider to be neutral, so it is definitely something that could work as a monitoring headphone. Starting off the bass, this headphone's bass is a polarizing aspect of the headphone. On one hand, it has a very solid response. It has a lot of impact and tactility, but at the same time, it is a little bit overstated. I think that the bass on these does sound a little bit bloated at times and bleeds into the mid-range a little bit. It is nowhere near the level of something like the Sony MDR Z7s. However, it is noticeably less clean than, let's say, the Allegias, for example. So the bass, while I can see being very enjoyable, is not as accurate as the rest of the frequency response, which is a little bit disappointing. However, on the grand scheme of things, for the price tag, I think the bass is perfectly fine. It has a good amount of dynamics as well as a reasonable amount of detail. While it is not the most detail on the bass in this price bracket for closebacks, I think, that would go to something like the Fostex 610s, or you'll go to Order Z Mobius. The bass on this is still really enjoyable, and doesn't detract from the sound overall. Moving on to the mid-range. The mid-range is probably the best part of this headphone. The mid-range sounds really accurate. It has a really good amount of gain in the 3K region, which a lot of headphones, especially closebacks, seem to get wrong. So that's really good because it does follow that Harman shelf in that region. So it gives an adequate amount of presence to a lot of vocals. It doesn't sound distant. It has all the body, texture, and power behind every single vocal that you'd want in a headphone, as well as a great amount of detail in that region. I think the mid-range detail on this is phenomenal, and it is no joke when people say this might be the HD600 of closebacks, because the mid-range on this is really accurate and phenomenally detailed as well. Mid-range on this headphone is probably on par with the Focal Allegias in terms of detail. However, these headphones have an even better mid-range tuning than the Focal Allegias. So from that point alone, I think that this headphone really outperforms all its competitors in its price bracket. Moving on to the treble. The treble in this headphone is another area where I think that is a little bit lacking. On one hand, I can see what they're trying to do with this headphone, which is go for overall slightly warm presentation. However, I think they missed a major opportunity to make this a more accurate monitoring headphone by toning down the treble a little bit too much. For me, the treble is a little bit too recessed, which is a problem that's further exacerbated by the fact that the bass is a little bit bloated. And these two factors combined make it a little bit too warm for my taste, but at the same time, it's not that bad, and for some people, it might be the perfect amount. The treble itself is reasonably well extended, however, it does lack the last bit of area and extension that I would want from a headphone. And furthermore, there is a slight dip around 10K. It is a narrow dip, but it is quite noticeable, so that's something that I think removes the harshness from the headphone, but at the same time, it removes a bit of detail from the treble presentation. So that is a bit of a trade-off, I guess. And overall, I think that this is a phenomenal sounding headphone for its price as well as build. The sound is warm, neutral presentation that is extremely well done, and it has the technical capabilities to back that up, which not a lot of closebacks can do in its price. And in some aspects, I think there's a headphone that competes with open backs in terms of technical performance, in particular the mid-range. The mid-range on this headphone is really phenomenally well done, and I'm quite impressed, as you might be able to tell. And moving on to dynamics. The dynamics in this headphone are quite average. It doesn't slam as hard as something like the Allegias, but I think the Allegia drivers are just that much more capable for dynamics, since it inherits traits from its older brother, the Focal Clear, which is one of the most dynamic headphones out of any price, really. I think that this headphone slams more than enough for its price, but it does fall behind some of the more expensive closebacks. For soundstage, that is probably one of the weakest areas of this headphone. The soundstage in this headphone is quite intimate, and imaging is good but not spectacular. It has enough width and enough height to give you good separation, but it's not something that I would call the HD800 of closebacks. So keep that in mind when you're buying this headphone. So overall, what I think of this headphone, I think that this is a headphone that has a lot of hype around it and actually lives up to the hype. It is not necessarily a giant killer. Overall, I'd still take something like the Focal Allegias over the Neumanns, simply for the fact that it has better resolution and better dynamics, and a better soundstage and a few other things. What the Neumanns do well, it does really well, and that is mid-range detail and overall tuning and balance in a closeback, which is very rare in a closeback headphone to be able to pull off well. So for that point alone, I think that the Neumanns are a clear recommendation for anyone that's looking for a warm neutral closeback headphone that can isolate very well, it is portable, and extremely well built. And even for someone who's not looking for those features, I think that the Neumann is worth a listen to because the mid-range presentation is so accurate and so surprising for its price that I think this might become a lot of people's new preferred close-back headphone.